Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canale and welcome back to Before the Lights podcast, the show that tells you how they made their mark. Well, being it's the end of the year of 2023, and sometimes I get the question of, Tommy, who's the favorite guest that you've ever interviewed? Which is impossible to answer because I enjoy thoroughly each and every person I've had on my show. Then the question becomes, well, who's the number one show that you have? And recently, I was asked that exact question once again. So I decided to do a top 5 in terms of downloads from the history of the show. In the show notes, all you're going to see is links to the full episodes, but the names are not there, just the numbers. This way, you have to listen to the show to find out who they are. But we're going to do them in order of downloads. You may be surprised by some of them, and I'm going to play clips from the original interviews of all 5. So let's get it started. In the 5th position is an episode that aired on December 10th of 2020. The lead singer of Lucero from Memphis, Tennessee, it's Ben Nichols. Where did the name Lucero come from?
Unfortunately, it's not too exciting. It's my guitar player was just keeping a scrapbook kind of phrases and ideas, and he'd gone through a Spanish-English dictionary and had written down a few Spanish phrases and Spanish words that he just thought sounded pretty, that he might use in a story or that he might use. In those days, kids made zines. And so we had this list, and we had booked our first show before we had a name. So it kind of came down to the wire, and we're like, oh, we need something to put on this flyer. And so we were kind of going through his scrapbook, and Lucero was one of the words he'd written down. None of us speak Spanish. We didn't know it was such a common last name, actually. We've met a whole lot of people now, all across the country with the last name Lucero. And we just weren't thinking that far ahead at the time. And there was no Google at the time. This is, 97, 98. And if there was Google, we didn't have it. So you just kind of pick a name and hope for the best. And we thought it sounded pretty. And luckily, we've been able to stick with it the whole time.
Early on, who is the band influenced by?
Man, there was early on, we were really quiet. We played a lot of 3/4 time, like kind of waltzes and like really, really simple, but really, slow and quiet, pretty stuff. And so I had wanted to do something that was kind of country influenced, which was the exact opposite direction of the Red 40 band that I'd been in with the loud punk rock stuff. I wanted to do something quiet and more, I was a big fan of Johnny Cash, especially since he was from Arkansas and I was from Arkansas. So that was a big thing for me. I was always a Johnny Cash fan. And I liked his kind of straightforward songwriting style. Just with an acoustic guitar and a pretty simple guitar lines. And not real flowery words. He could paint you a really detailed picture and tell you a really great story. So he was always a hero of mine. And then, and Tom Waits was a huge influence on me in those years. I would love to think that I could write that way, but I've tried for 20 years and I can't write a song like he could, like he can still. He had a song called Blind Love that was kind of a country-ish Tom Waits song. And that song in particular struck me. I was like, ooh, if I could be in a band that just played songs like this, let's do it. And that was the impetus for Lucero.
Was the goal, okay, 2 questions. One, was the original goal just to play one show? And was your first show really in front of just 6 people?
Yeah, that's not an exaggeration. It might not be exactly the right number, but there a handful of people. Yes. I think there was a Canadian punk rock band, a local Memphis punk rock band, and then we opened the show. Now I know we played 6 songs. That's for sure. That's all we had was 6, and we played every one of them. And they were all really slow and kind of sad. And we had no idea what this small punk rock crowd was going to think about us. But they were very gracious. They were actually very kind. There might have been a dozen folks there. Who knows? But, but half of those guys were in the other bands. So yeah, maybe around 6 people. And yeah, that was 1998 in the Huling warehouse. It was just a warehouse space that some kids lived in, and they'd put on shows. It was right downtown, right across the street from the Lorraine Motel, actually, down there in Memphis. So yeah, we had very humble beginnings.
It has definitely grown. Explain to my listeners, what are the Lucero family block parties?
Oh yeah. We started those a while back in Arkansas, actually. There was a promoter in Batesville who wanted to do kind of an outdoor festival type thing that was kind of centered around us and our fan base. But after a while, we ended up moving that to Memphis. And now, for the last few years, it's taken place in Midtown Memphis at a venue called Minglewood Hall. And we put up a big stage in the parking lot. And basically, it's a good excuse to have a big hometown show and invite a bunch of these kind of bigger bands that we've met out on the road. Whether it's St. Paul and the Broken Bones or Turnpike Troubadours or a Memphis band, North Mississippi All-Stars. We've had a lot of really cool guys that really we should be opening up for, but they've been nice enough to come and play our festival, the Lucero Block Party in Memphis. So it's kind of our biggest hometown show annually. And it's just kind of it's become our kind of birthday party every year.
In 2018, it was your 20th anniversary for the show, and the mayor named it Lucero Day. That's kind of cool.
It was awesome. That's one of the coolest things that's ever happened to us. I think the story I heard was that a neighbor of Brian Venable, the guitar player, I believe before the mayor was the mayor, he was this guy's lawyer. And so they'd just been, acquaintances and had worked together in the past, just in that capacity. But he was an old friend. He'd become an old friend. And so this guy just kept bugging the mayor, basically, until finally he relented and signed the piece of paper that declared, I believe it's April 13th or 14th, Lucero Day in Memphis. But that's something pretty cool. You can take a picture of it and show your dad and say, look what I've done.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. It's nice to be noticed.
Ben, on what album do you feel the band actually took the so-called next step?
Man, that's an interesting question. We recorded kind of some demos in the early years, but we hooked up with our buddies Luther and Cody Dickinson, who played in a band called the North Mississippi All-Stars. And their dad was Jim Dickinson, who was a well-known producer. He had worked with Big Star and The Replacements. He played piano on Wild Horses. Jim had a crazy kind of career. And he had a little barn down in Mississippi. And his kids were in this excellent band. And so we ended up working with them on our self-titled record and then our second record, Tennessee. And we still play most of those songs to this day in the set every night. That record, Tennessee, is kind of the one that folks still talk about. It's that's kind of it didn't necessarily put us on the map. It's not like it was a major label debut, or it's not like it sold a whole lot of copies, but it did. Over the years, it kind of filtered out into the world, and that's the one that people usually reference as their favorite, and it's the one where we kind of made a mark. Even if it didn't make us famous, we got a toehold that we could kind of expand from with the Tennessee record.
In the fourth position is a show that aired on February 11th, 2021. He was wrongfully convicted to 100 years in a Thai prison. The author of Good Luck Frenchie. This is Alan Olivier, and this is Gripping. When did you think you were targeted, or when did you know you were a sacrificial pawn in this whole thing?
At the time of the bust.
So not until the very end you knew you were done.
I heard Bennett, when I heard one of the police agents from Canada, or CMP Barry Bennett, screaming, police,
you knew you were done.
Yeah.
Was there, Alan, there was in the movie, and tell me how realistic this was, an incident where you go to the hotel room to have a discussion about the whole buy is going to take place.
Yeah.
Was that recorded by the RCMP? And if so, did those tapes ever surface?
Yes, they used them here before the court.
Okay.
And even in the tape, in some section of the tape, in the recording, after the deal didn't work out with Porn Sisters, after it fell off, Barry Bennett in the room, he said to me, "There's going to be some fucking unhappy people back home if that fucking deal doesn't fucking work out." And Dop, who played the role of the fat man, turned towards me and says, "Yeah, we've been waiting a long time for that, Alan." And that it felt like the kiss of death at that point. They had total control of me. They were providing me money to eat and to pay for my guest house while they were staying in a 5-star hotel. They were paying for my drugs, and all of a sudden I didn't have a dime in my pocket. So they wanted to have their transaction going forward. They didn't care at that point whoever would be the source of heroin over there. They were ready to deal with anyone to ensure that they wouldn't come back here in Canada empty-handed. Because that operation alone did cost the Canadian taxpayers over $1 million.
So I have two questions. First one, in regards to the night, heading to meet to have the big buy bus that was going to go down. What were your thoughts going there? Were you thinking this is finally over and I just need to get out of here? Or what kind of thoughts did you have?
When the time came to do their transaction, Porn about half an hour before came to the room and announced that he had found another source. There were two Thai girls who were willing to do the deal, but instead to sell them 5 kilos at once, they proposed to do 2.5 kilos first, and actually 2 kilos at first and 3 kilos afterward if everything goes fine. And the RCMP wanted absolutely to do their deal in a public place. And that's why everyone with whom they talked before that, from Friday to Sunday, because Porn introduced them to other people, the Thais refused to deal with them because the RCMP wanted to deal in a public place, absolutely. And for the Thais, that was impossible in Chiang Mai to do that. So at that point on Sunday night, that little Thai girl came, Nipa, and she proposed to do the deal in a parking lot 2 blocks away from the hotel, the parking lot of a cinema that they had over there with the big sign of the movie Rainbow. And I remember pretty well the old place. And the fat man, who was the head of their so-called criminal organization, agreed to have Derek Flanagan, the RCMP member who got killed over there, to go with me and Nipa to look at where she wanted to do the deal. And we walked out of the room and went with her in her small pickup truck. Her little sister was with us. And she had her brother on a scooter not far behind with a couple kilos of heroin waiting for these guys. So we drove to the parking lot, and Flanagan looked at the place and he agreed the place was convenient to do the deal. And I walked back to the hotel with Nipa while Flanagan stayed over there with the Thais to, let's see, keep an eye on things. And I went to tell Barry Bennett and the fat man that Flanagan was in the parking lot and waiting for them with the money to do the transaction. And at that point, my role was supposed to be concluded. It was to be over with, because all I was supposed to do was to introduce them to a source of heroin, and after that, I could walk my way. And at that point, Barry Bennett says, no, your insurance policy that things will go fine and you'll come with us. And they took me, and he pushed up the small truck, a taxi over there that they had all over Asia, and we just jumped in the back for a couple of blocks until we got to the parking lot. And Flanagan was waiting there, and as soon as we got there, Nipa indicated to the RCMP officer, Bennett, Dup, and Girdlestone, to follow her, and she jumped in her truck and she started driving in the alley next to the cinema that they had over there, and Bennett refused to walk to jump in the truck, so she said, just follow me by foot. And Girdlestone, their so-called plane pilot, appeared with the money, and we started walking, and I drove maybe, I don't know, the distance of a block and a half from there under a light post, and with Nipa and Flanagan. And she wanted to do the deal there at the junction of the street and the back alley that they had there. Under a light post, there was nothing else around. That was totally quiet. It was a dirt road all over. And we walked back to Bennett, and Flanagan explained to him where she wanted to do the deal. And Bennett decided to come on board with that idea, and he agreed to follow us. He asked the money to Girdlestone, and he asked Girdlestone to stay behind, which was about a block and a half, 2 blocks away from where we were parked to do the transaction. It was impossible for him to see anything or to hear anything at that point. And as we got there, the first thing Bennett asked Nipa was, where was the dope? And Nipa's brother was hidden with his back to a fence with a bunch of vegetation covering up. It was dark outside, was pitch black, except for under the post. It was pretty hard to see him. And Flanagan, when we got there, walked behind the truck next to the cargo area on the right side at the back. And Bennett was at the front with the front door open. And over there, they don't drive on the same side as here. They drive on the right side. He had half his body inside the truck. I was standing next to him, and Nipa told her that she wanted to see the money, and Bennett had the bag with the money, and Nipa said she wanted to see the money, absolutely. And Bennett said, no, show us the dope first. And at some point, she yelled to her brother to come out from his hiding spot, and he walked to the truck with the air in his hand, and he jumped at the back. And meanwhile, Bennett opened the bag, and we realized that the bundles of money had been all wrapped up with duct tape. At that point, I told Bennett to fuck off, and I started walking away. And Flanagan said, he's got it. And Bennett started screaming out loud, police, police. And at that point, Flanagan made like 2 steps. He was a pretty big guy, an athlete. And he jumped. He just tackled the guy at the back of the truck in the cargo area and nailed him at the bottom. And the fight started. At that point, Nipa was behind the wheel in the truck, and she walked out of the truck. Her little sister was standing nearby. And as Nipa jumped on Flanagan's back to get him off her brother, Pim Pam sat behind the wheel, and Bennett, after that, jumped also on the back of the truck to help Flanagan. At that point, Pim Pam, Nipa's sister, took off with the truck. She turned the corner and sped away. And I started walking backward when I saw that. And when I saw Bennett jumping at the back, I started to walk faster. And as I got at the other corner of the other street, Flanagan was coming running, just like a greyhound, and except that he was 3 times the weight of the greyhound, and I was only 120 pounds, and he nailed me on the ground at the bottom of the ditch, small ditch, and we could see the truck driving away in the dark. All we could see was the tail light, and at some point we heard bang, and we saw the tail light, the brake light at the back lighting up for a couple of seconds, and after that the truck drove away. And Girdlestone asked me, who the fuck's got a gun? Where is your gun? And I told him no one had a gun at all. And at that point, he took me up, and he was screaming for their backup. The Thai police wasn't anywhere around. And after maybe a minute, the Thai police came. 2 Thai police in plain clothes came running, and he tried to give me to them. But at that point, I was wondering what went on. I said, I don't feel like being shot here in the back alley in Chiang Mai. I started running away. I managed to get free. And Girdlestone started screaming at the Thai police to shoot me several times. And as I was running towards the parking lot where there were people, I wanted to make sure people would see me to ensure I wouldn't be shot there. I started listening to him telling the Thai police, shoot him, shoot him. He was screaming his lungs out. And as I turned back, I saw the Thai police aiming at me with his 357 Browning, all silver. I will remember all the time.
Before we get to number 3, and 3, 2, 1 could surprise some people, but these shows still get listens to this day. Now, if I did a top 5 a year from now, I think this would change because some of the newer shows are gaining greatly and pretty fast on these top 5. There wasn't a clear-cut top 5. Like between 5 and 6, 6 can catch 5, 7 can move up, that type of thing. And 4 could catch 3. 3, 4, and 5 could interact, and then 1 and 2 right now are in a league of all their own, which we'll get to. But at number 3, it's the 14-year NFL offensive tackle from the Cleveland Browns who just retired as a radio color analyst with the team. From my hometown of Streator, Illinois, this is Doug Deacon.
You know, growing up in Streator, I think, you know, the one thing, it's good, hardworking people that, and it's a town that, you know, had some tough people that, weren't afraid to put their dukes up and fight. And sometimes I think, that was one of the main events for a Friday night that there was a group from Ottawa would come over, and which was a town about 16 miles away, and the guys from Streator didn't want them in their territory, and the next thing you know, they'd be duking it out. So you definitely learn toughness growing up in Streator.
I think my father was probably a few of those Friday night fights.
Oh yeah, your dad was one of the best. He was a beauty. In fact, one of my best friends, Wally Roach. Wally is probably about maybe 5'10", 180 pounds, but he is the toughest guy I think I know. Him and then there was actually a former policeman, Jim Mazak, who was a Marine, and whenever there was a fight and they called the police and Maz was the officer that responded, nobody would do anything. They just walk away because they knew they were going to get their butt kicked by Maz.
So moving on, we could talk about this all day, but you were a tight end at the University of Illinois. And talk to me about how the teams were like at Illinois at the time, because if I recall right, were they not on probation?
Yeah, unfortunately, I got recruited to Illinois by Pete Elliott, who was the head coach, and at that time, and there was a slush fund that came up, and they put the University of Illinois on probation for 4 years, which was unfortunate and unfair when you consider some of the things that they wrote them up for. One would be one of the players' grandfather died, and they gave the player money to fly home for his grandfather's funeral in California, which is, I guess against the rules, but it's the right thing to do. And I signed to go there. And then when after the slush fund hit, they said, you don't have to honor your scholarship. You can go someplace else. And both my parents were Illinois graduates, and I didn't realize, how severe the punishment was going to be. They ended up having to fire the coach, who was one of the greatest guys that I've ever met, Pete Elliott, 12-letter athlete at the University of Michigan, and just a superhuman being. And they brought in a guy from Army who had actually recruited me there, Jim Ballack. And when you walk into the middle of or at the end of a recruiting class, you don't always get the cream of the crop. And we unfortunately, probably didn't get the cream of the crop. And I think during the course of my 4 years there, the 30-some scholarships that were given, only 4 of them ended up being there, surviving all 4 years.
Wow.
Then there was one more who was a walk-on who had never played football, ended up earning a scholarship, and his name was Tim McCarthy, who was also the Secret Service agent that took the bullet for President Reagan. So we didn't win a lot of games, but we had a lot of good people.
Is it true, and I'm not sure if this is factual or not, but I'm sure you'll let me know, there was a coach that was released, and then did you basically lead a charge from that point forward about getting either a coach back or moving on to another coach?
Yeah, we were in the midst of my senior season, and we were getting ready to play Ohio State, which at that time had been the national champion a couple years previous. I was the same age as Rex Kern, Jan White, Jack Tatum, and those guys who were on that Ohio State team. And prior to the game, it was a home game. We used to stay at a retreat called Allerton the night before the game, and one of the coaches came up to me and he said, Ellis Rainsberger, and he says, hey, you know, the head coach was Jim Ballack, and they said, you know, hey, they fired the coach. Do you think he ought to tell the team? I said, no, I just saw him in the dining room. He said, no, after the game tomorrow, he's gone. And I said, yeah. So he gave us a speech. It's the first time in the history of the NCAA. He said that a coach had been fired in the middle of the season, and he appreciated how hard we played, and he, you know, thanked us. And so we went out and we played Ohio State, and we actually had them down at halftime, and we ended up losing by a couple touchdowns. So after the game, we came in the locker room, and I just asked the coaches if they'd leave, and just the players would be in there. And I said, hey guys, if, you know, the coach is not going to be here next week for next week's game, I'm not going to be here. Anybody want to go with me? And everybody raised their hand, and we sent a letter to the athletic board and told them that they'd misjudged the situation, and we thought that they should you know, keep the coach, or we weren't going to play the next week. Well, fortunately, we were playing over Purdue for homecoming, and so it was kind of essential that our team showed up. So they had an emergency meeting of the athletic board, and they rehired him for the remainder of the season, and they, you know, said they'd reevaluate him after the season was over. And so we went over and we played Purdue, and we ended up beating them. And so after the game, I gave the coach the game ball, and the one thing I do remember about it was, you know, getting home, and I happened to had the radio on, and Howard Cosell came on, and he's talking about it in West Lafayette, Indiana today. They gave our coach a game ball, and he was talking about what we did. And in my athletic career, I think it's one of the things I'm most proud of, that you know, loyalty is something that doesn't exist in sports anymore a lot of times, because of, you know, in the pro aspect, you have free agency where, you know, the money dictates where you go. And I think it was a case of our loyalty and dedication, and you know, the guys that were on our team, you know, I appreciate them, you know, agreeing to go along with it. And so it was one of those things that I guess you always remember.
I'll bet. It shows you as a leader in the ability to lead your teammates and them actually following. So, you know, it showed some signs early on of where you were heading in your career. You were drafted in 1971 in the 6th round at the 142nd pick. How did you find out, Doug, that you were chosen, and what was that feeling like?
Well, it wasn't quite like today where they have the TV show that tells everybody. And I happened to be at home, and my mother had a bridge club. There would be 8 ladies, and they'd rotate houses, and they'd come over and they'd play bridge. So phone rings, and I get the phone call. It's the new head coach of the Browns. It was Nick Skorich, who had just replaced Blanton Collier, who had retired with the Browns. And he says, hi, is Doug Deacon there? I said, yeah. He says, this is Nick Skorich, head coach of the Cleveland Browns. We just drafted you in the 6th round as an offensive tackle. I said, offensive tackle? Any chance I could play tight end? He said, well, we'll see when we get there. So I went upstairs to tell my mom. And I said, hey, Mom, guess what? I just got drafted by the Browns in the 6th round. And she said, oh, that's great. 3 clubs. She made her next bid. So she wouldn't let me interrupt the bridge game.
That's a good story to have. So you were tight end in Illinois. You just brought it up, and then they draft you as an offensive tackle. Was the first time you played offensive tackle then when you got to the Browns?
I would have to say, yeah, for the most part. Although I did play in the blue-gray game in the Senior Bowl, and in the blue-gray game, one of our offensive linemen got hurt, and we were short of an offensive lineman, so I was the next biggest body. So they just told me to go in and play. And I'd never played tackle. I didn't even know what I could figure out by looking across the line of scrimmage, who you were supposed to block. But it was one of those games that. In fact, our coaching staff was the coaching staff from West Virginia. And that time it was Bobby Bowden. And I think I did earlier in the game, when I was playing tight end before they moved me over, I caught the only pass we had in the game, and it was for 7 yards. So it was a different type of game back then.
Sliding at number 2 on the chart is a show that aired on April 21st in the year 2022. I think this will surprise a lot of listeners, but it shouldn't, because it gets a ton of listens and a ton of downloads. Coming in at number 2, the Italian-Australian comedian, the biggest comedian you've never heard of. It's Joe Avati. In the opening, I said that Joe's been dubbed the biggest comedian you've never heard of. He's recorded the fastest selling comedy show ever in Canada by selling 6,400 tickets in 2 hours. So you may not have heard of Joe, but now you have, and now you will, and you'll watch his stuff and be hooked like I have. And then you'll tell somebody else. But Joe, what is it like for you to have that tag of being the biggest comedian you've never heard of? So you're still somewhat like under the radar.
Yeah, well, it's great. I'll tell you why it's great. From a business perspective, I haven't even touched the tip of the iceberg, to be honest, right? Because, yes, I sell out theatres, 2,000-3,000 people a night, or I've done arenas, 10,000 people as well. But there's still a lot of people who've never heard of me, and it's fantastic because it means that I've got longevity in this. You know, I'm 47, so I've got another 20 years of doing this. There are people that are still now discovering me. This morning, before I did this podcast, I did a radio interview with the number one radio station in Sydney. I've got emails from people going, I've never heard of you. You're hilarious. I've got to come to your show. And it's great. It really is. My ego died a long time ago. I had enough fame when I was, 27, 28, 29, 30, that I got over that. I had enough. It was enough to satisfy my ego. After that, it became a business, right? And so knowing that there's people still to come on board, it's actually better, I think, that way, because I think that if I'd peaked at 30, I would have blown money, I would have, partied too much, and I wouldn't have focused, and I probably wouldn't be here. So the fact that I've done all that, I got it out of my system, and now I'm focused on producing comedy shows and better comedy styles and better material, and now more people are coming, I think it worked well for me. So I'm happy to be the biggest comedian no one's ever heard of.
How do you keep fresh material for new fans coming in, but also for your loyal fans that keep following you?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to, because there was a period there where I kind of didn't refresh it, especially for this tour. And I've never done this before. It was always kind of one routine in, one routine out. And here's a new one. Let's get rid of that one, because I'm on stage for an hour and a half. So as long as I did my hour and a half, how I did it, I really wasn't concerned as long as people were laughing. But this particular tour here, the Have Some Respect tour, world tour, I said out with all that, with all my and I had some killer 15-year material, some gags that we've been developing for 15 years. So if you can listen to that in its infancy back then and you hear it now, you'll see how it's developed. And I'm still adding bits and pieces, but I've said no, drawn a line in the sand, out goes all the material. And I never wrote a show before from scratch. And it's a lot easier than I thought. And, well, for me it was anyway. And it was such a great experience. I'm really excited. I'm more excited now than I ever have been to perform. And I never used to watch comedy, I've got to confess. And a lot of people might think this is weird. I wasn't into comedy. I got into comedy because I wanted to see what other people do. And, and how could I make my show different and bigger and better? And so I started to learn about comedy. So believe it or not, I'm only just starting, Tommy. I'm as a comedian, just starting now. So it's really exciting.
What's the trick or the tip to keep an audience laughing for 90 minutes? When you were talking earlier about you were on stage for 5, but if you can keep them laughing for 1, you're good. But now that you're the headliner and the rock star of comedy, how do you keep them going for 90?
Well, Okay, so you break it up into stories. Okay, so 90 minutes is a collection of tiny little stories. So I focus on the little stories, making each little story great first. Okay, like this is the process that I've been doing for this tour. This is how I put a tour together, a new show. So I have all these ideas. I write that little bit. Could be a minute, it could be 30 seconds, it could be 3 minutes. I then do shows, private shows, corporate shows, and I put on certain little shows, and I test it. So I do my old stuff, and in between I test all these new bits. Now, and I've been doing that for 6-7 months now. So now I've got all those 6 or 7 months of new bits, and I've got a list of everything that works, and I write down, did it work? No, it didn't work. Redo it. Oh, now it works. And so now I've got all those 6 or 7 bits, and I sew them together into a story. So it seems like one long story, and that one long story lasts 90 minutes. And, of course, it has to be funny, funnier, get funnier, funnier, and funnier. At a certain point, you have to give people a bit of a break, so you do some lesser material because you need to get them breathing again for the end. And then it's you know, and I'm very conscious of laughs. So, and you can see my style. So if you see now, I'm rapid fire. Now I smash people. I'm like a machine gun of jokes. But when I first started, there was 15 seconds between me stopping, looking around. And now when I look at me doing that, I go, what are you doing? Get on with the joke, mate. Hurry up. You can't just leave 15 seconds like that. And I can't go back to being that relaxed on stage. And I'm bang. So can you imagine, you come from my show for 90 minutes and I'm just hammering people for 90 minutes straight with observations, gags, impressions. And it just go. I mean, I do more than 90. I mean, some shows I've done 90, about 105 minutes straight. And I could have kept going. I've done 2 hours. In Chicago once I did 2 hours. It's not a problem for me to do that. I don't know. How do you keep it going? You got to be funny, and you got to make people wanting more. You got to know when to get out, you know, or when a joke, you get out of that joke. Hey, enough. You've done too much of it. Move on. Yeah.
We've talked about how you sell out shows and sold out many different arenas. Did you have a show? Is this true that there was 2 brothers and one didn't get in, and there was end up being a fight and the police got called? Is that a true story?
How do you know that story?
Research.
You must have done a lot of
I do a lot of research.
Okay, so what happened was there were 2 brother-in-laws. They didn't like, well, one of them didn't like the other brother-in-law, but he didn't tell him. So this brother-in-law says to this guy, he goes, are you going to come to the Joe Vardy show? I'm going to get tickets. And this brother-in-law says, nah, I don't want to go. Anyway, this brother-in-law doesn't get tickets because no one said they wanted to go. But in the meantime, this one brother-in-law went behind his back and did get tickets. So he came to the show, and this brother-in-law found out that this brother-in-law was at the show. So he rang him up and he said, I know you're at the Joe Vardy show. I asked you if you wanted to come. You said no. Meanwhile, you've gone behind my back and got tickets. So let's have it out. He goes, I'm outside in the car park. Come out and let's deal with this. Obviously, you've got a problem with me. And the other brother-in-law said, no, leave me alone. He goes, well, if you don't come out, I'm going to ring the venue and put a hoax bomb scare. So anyway, we had an intermission. During the intermission, the phone rang, and sure enough, there was a bomb scare. The venue manager came into our room because obviously everyone now has to be evacuated. He came in and they have to ring the bomb squad. So he came into our room and said, someone has just called as a bomb in the venue. We have to call the bomb squad. They call the police come down. While the police coming down, everybody is now outside. So the brother-in-law who didn't get the tickets, who's waiting in the car, he sees the brother-in-law come out. He gets out of the car, runs up to him, doesn't have a discussion, and King hits him. Do you know what a king hit is? Just from behind, just
like a sucker punch.
Yeah, okay, you call that a sucker punch, right? And broke his jaw, broke his nose. So now, we didn't know this. Obviously, we don't know the story. So now one of my friends who was outside saw this, comes running back in because we were still inside waiting for the police. He comes running in saying, "Oh, my God, someone is bashing up your audience members." So can you imagine us who doesn't know what's going on between these two brother-in-laws going, "Fuck, someone's called a bomb on us. Our audience is being bashed up." It was like, you remember when the plane hit the building in September 11 and everyone's going, "Oh, some idiot's driven into the building." And then you see that second one. And as you see the second one going into the building, your mind automatically, everyone thought the same thing, went, "Oh my God, this is war. This is the end of the world." So that's what it was like. So that's what happened. So people were fighting to get into the show. We had 20 other shows on that tour. The guy could have come to another one. It was that big. So the guy got done for assault. Well, his brother-in-law, more importantly, he was hospitalised with a broken jaw and a broken nose. That's a very powerful hit. Mm-hmm. And, of course, the other one is now, I'm not sure if he did jail time, but he would have been charged for assault.
And before I announce who the number one downloaded show is, let me just say this. Between number 2 and number 1, they flip-flop back and forth depending on when I look at it. So when I did this, Joe is number 2. This person was number 1, but they could be flip-flopped very easily. This show was released on October 8th of 2020. He's an emotional wellness and direction expert, the host of the Dr. John Deloney Show. It's none other. He's been on the show twice. This is the original show from Dr. John Deloney.
What did you learn from handling all those early crisis situations that has helped you where you are today?
In a strange way, it's made me infinitely more optimistic about the human condition. It makes me love people deeper. It makes me just an empathetic guy. I think at the end of the day, most people, most of the time, are doing the best they can with the tools they've got in their toolkit. Most parents don't set out to handicap their kids by always getting over-involved. Most parents are trying to relive their own childhoods because they were disconnected too. And most parents are trying to love the best way they know how. And sometimes that's over-involvement. Sometimes that's fill in the blank. Most kids are kids, man. They're making 18-year-old decisions. They're making 14-year-old decisions. And we forget that sometimes. And with how expensive college is, the stakes of those decisions are so weighty now, right? An 18-year-old can't be an 18-year-old because that's a $50,000 year he's just blown, right? Mm-hmm. Or if they want to transfer college, that's a year of eligibility they've lost. And so it's just a pile-on effect. But it's made me empathetic. And so now when I take phone calls, my wife asked me the other day, we live out in the woods out here in Nashville. And she said the other day, "What do you do?" And I said, I'm having the same conversations I've had with parents for the last 15 years. There's just some folks here at Dave Ramsey's office that puts those calls on the internet and then he's paying me a salary. And so it's very similar to what I've been doing for years, which is helping people make the next crooked, wobbly little step of their life in the best way they can.
Well, how does one handle trauma? And on top of that, I'm sure somebody that's 18, 19 years old in college views trauma very differently than somebody who's a lot older.
Right. So I think it's important to define trauma. We often think of trauma as what the nerds call, what we call acute, right? It's point of sale. There is a car wreck. You saw somebody get shot. Your dad walked in and hit mom or something egregious like that. Trauma is two things, or it's actually three things, one of which we know, which I just said, but it's two other things. Number one is cumulative. And so dad doesn't have to come in and just cold cock their son. A mom doesn't have to come in there drunk one day and smash the car. Dad can just spend 14 years going figures, right? It's cumulative. And so the way it's a tiny little pebble in a backpack versus a cinder block. Over 15 years, the dismissiveness, the golly, man, what a loser. Those kind of things add up, right? Those add up in the workplace. Those add up in whatever culture or society you live in, if you're on the wrong side of what's cool and what's supported. But it also, the third one is it's neglect. It's trauma is a thing that you should have got as a kid that you didn't get. You should have received somebody looking you in the eye and telling you that you're a person of value. You should have received somebody who loved you for more than your achievements, your accomplishments. And so those are 3 areas of trauma that adults deal with at age 50, and they play them out in all sorts of grown-up games. 18-year-olds play those things out. 14-year-olds play those things out. One of the great myths is that you, quote unquote, just get over stuff. I think you got to be vulnerable. I think you got to have people in your life that you can walk through some of those things with. And yeah, I don't think any of us do a very good job of dealing with that most of the time.
I have this theory, and I just recently, actually yesterday, told this to a friend of mine, that there's a circle of relationships, and whether it's with husband and wife, parents and children, that starts with respect, leads down to communication, which builds trust, which has love. Love goes back up to respect. I said, kill one of those 4, and the next one in line stops. And
so give it to me one more time. You've got respect.
Starts with respect, that leads into communication, open communication, which builds trust, which leads to love, which comes back to respect. So I said, if you stop respecting someone, the communication will break down. If you don't trust someone, you will not love them. And if you don't love them, you'll get no respect, or you won't respect them. And that cycle will continue to go until somebody decides to break it. And in relationships, when things go bad, one of those 4 things, in my opinion, is gone away, and nobody's fixing it. And now I said, if it's a husband, wife, and a husband feels like they're not getting respected, they're going to stop the communication. You feel like you're not getting love, so you're not giving respect. And it's just this vicious circle that never ends.
I love it, dude. So the word I would replace there, it's the same word. I just have heard people over the years weaponize the word respect, which is I demand, you will give. And respect to me always is a hierarchical thing. The word I would put there is value.
Oh, I like it.
I think dads crave value, not because they're making money, not because they're big and they've got big arms, but just because they're dads and they love, and they don't know how to do that. We weren't trained to do that. We were trained to quit crying and get up and go run and go hit home run, whatever the thing is. Right.
Right.
And I think my wife wants to have value more than the things she can accomplish, more than just the way she looks, more than just. She wants to have value because she's a person. And so, yeah, I'm with you, man. I love that circle, that if you're not communicating, if you're not honoring one another, then you just get in this weird dance, this almost figure 8 dance, and you never fully connect until somebody has the courage to stop that machine and face it head on and stare down that forest fire.
Can somebody get 1% better each day for 100 days and change a habit, even though they say habits take 21 days to break? Is that possible?
I think any sort of human transformation is possible. So yes, I'll 100% agree with that. I'll 1,000% agree with that. I think a habit, it's just that it's a dance, right? Of actions versus thoughts and thoughts versus actions. I think you can decide tomorrow, I'm done. And I've just known folks who have just said, I'm done. I know folks like myself who've tried to quit eating gummy candy my whole life, and it's nature's heroin for me, dude. I just love me some gummy candy. I eat so obnoxiously. You don't know shame, brother, until you're sitting in a grocery store with food that is 8 times what it should be, because I want to make sure the cow was hugged by like a Roman monk before it was killed, right? And then on the other hand, I'm sitting there looking at bags of gummy candy, right? It's just like my body's like, dude, pick one, man. Just pick one, right? But yeah, I just known people who just said no more. I've known trauma survivors. I've known people who with weight loss. I've known athletes. I've known addicts who just said enough. I'm putting those bricks down and I'm done. So absolutely.
How does one heal from an ex and not allowing the previous wounds to affect their present relationships?
Oh, that's a great question. Give me some more context to that.
So somebody, has
one of those questions that the podcast interviewer drops in that's personal.
No, it's not personal.
I'm messing with you, Tommy.
No, it's not personal. But I mean,
so how does somebody deal with their dad when I'm just kidding? No,
yeah,
that's good.
So my thought was, and I've heard of this many times. Somebody breaks up or they have a divorce, and those effects are still lingering with them. And they bring them to their new present relationship because they haven't really healed from the previous relationship.
Oh, that's awesome. So here's the thing, Tommy, as a culture, we are dreadful, terrible at grief.
Okay.
We are terrible at putting periods at the end of sentences. We're awful at it. We have no cultural understanding of what being uncomfortable is. And so, man, I could talk all day about this. I think it was in the 20s, early 30s when Good Housekeeping or Southern Living, one of these magazines, announced that the room in the front of the house is no longer the parlor. It is now the living room. It was a declaration. And we outsourced death to somebody else. We outsourced food preparation to somebody else. We now can get wrinkles taken away. We can get fancy diets and fill in the blank, right? We are not comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so when we get broken up with, we have this immediate sense of, I'm a victim and that hurts. I pick up these cinder blocks and I start carrying them around. And we don't do good with ceremony. We don't do good with this is over now. We don't do good with just sitting down and hurting for a minute. That's a natural grieving process. What we've done as a society, brother, is we have pathologized every negative emotion to where all we have is happiness and anxiety and depression. We have 2 diagnoses and firecrackers. That's it, man. And that's not human existence, right? I can't tell you how many college students who came in and were weeping. Hey, my granddad died. My mom just left my dad. I've got depression. And I would say, no, dude, you're sad. You're supposed to be sad. This sucks. This hurts. And you've got to get some people around you that you love and trust that can be vulnerable with that are going to help you heal from this. And so all that to say is, man, if you get dumped, you've got to spend some moment grieving that loss. A part of you that helped you be whole is no more. And you got to put a period at that. You got to get people in your life. You got to properly grieve it and then understand what you've learned and then move on next, right? Don't just go chasing the next Band-Aid, the next numbing agent, which is usually another person that's going to wallpaper over whatever you're trying to hold down, right?
That's right.
Oh, man, you're going to get me fired up on that one, Tom.
And there you go. The top 5 as of the end of the year 2023. Number 5, Ben Nichols. Number 4, Alan Olivier. Number 3 is Doug Deacon. Number 2, Joe Avati. And right now at number 1 is Dr. John Deloney. Before I go, I want everybody to know to remember that I am an inspirational speaker that will inspire you to inspire others. My story of beating cancer against the odds will get you on the path to change your life. Click the link in the show notes or go to TommyCannelli.com. That's TommyCannelli.com. That's going to do it for this episode of Before the Lights. Happy New Year, everybody. I hope 2024 is your best year ever. Until then, a salute, a chin chin.